May 17, 1944. Northern Luzon, Philippines. Dawn crawled over the ridgeline like a dying ember, barely strong enough to burn through the fog that clung to the jungle. The air was wet, heavy, alive with the slow drip of last night's rain. And in the middle of that grey stillness, Private First Class Samuel Hartman crouched behind a twisted banyan root, his fingers wrapped around the long, weathered stock of a rifle no one in the platoon respected. The men called it his farm gun, a beat-up Winchester Model 70 he'd carried from his family ranch in Montana, its walnut stock scarred from years bouncing on tractor fenders, its bluing half-worn from sweat and dust. To the others, it looked like a relic for chasing coyotes, not a weapon for war. Marines joked that the Japanese would die laughing before a bullet ever reached them. Hartman didn't argue. He simply cleaned the bolt, checked the chamber, and kept quiet. But this morning the jokes had stopped. Somewhere above them, hidden in the tangle of ridges, palms, and needle grass, Japanese snipers were watching. 2 Marines had already been hit at sunrise, dragged back down the slope with neat holes through their helmets. The platoon was pinned in a ravine with no visibility, no angle, and no idea how many rifles were scanning for their next target. Only Hartman seemed calm. Sergeant Willis crawled to him through the mud, face tight with frustration. "You're up, Montana. Lieutenant says you're the only one who can see far enough through this crap." "I'll try," Hartman answered quietly. "No, don't try. Do it. We've got 2 squads stuck here, and those bastards got our range dialed in." Hartman nodded. He pressed deeper into the damp roots, raised the rifle, and slid the cracked leather cheek pad against his face. The jungle was thick, too thick for a normal shot. But Hartman had grown up tracking deer in brush just as dense. He wasn't looking for figures. He was looking for patterns, disturbances, imperfections. A sliver of something that didn't belong. A bead of water dripped from a fern. A palm frond shifted with the wind. A patch of leaves, too still. There. He exhaled slowly, like he had since he was 10 years old on the range behind the barn. The reticle settled just below a shadow tucked into a crook of rocks high on the ridge. He squeezed the trigger with the patience of a farmer checking fence wire. The rifle cracked. A helmet rolled out from behind the rock and bounced down the slope. "Jesus!" Willis whispered. "You actually hit him!" Hartman didn't answer. He was already cycling the bolt, already searching again. The Marines behind him went silent, staring at the lanky ranch kid who never raised his voice, never asked for credit, never fit in, now working the ridge like an accountant tallying debts. 10 seconds later, he fired again. Another shape slumped forward, falling out of a palm like a sack of grain. "2," Hartman murmured. The jungle responded with a burst of Arisaka fire. Rounds snapped overhead, chewing through bamboo. Shouts echoed from the ridge, Japanese voices warning, repositioning. Hartman kept his face pressed against the stock, ignoring the chaos, scanning the shadows for the tiniest betrayal of movement. And then he saw it, sunlight glinting off an oiled bolt handle deep behind a clump of ferns. He fired. The light went out. 3, he whispered. The Marines behind him stared like they were witnessing a ghost. For months they had laughed at his rifle, calling it a cowboy toy, saying he should trade it in for a real weapon. But watching him now, calm, precise, unshakable, changed something. He wasn't just shooting, he was hunting, and the jungle was his pasture. Willis slapped his shoulder. "Keep going, Montana. Keep going." But Hartman didn't need encouragement. He had felt it from the first shot, the shift in control. The Japanese had watched them all morning. Now he was watching back. Through the vines, he saw the outline of a camouflaged face leaning to get a better angle on Sergeant Willis. Hartman steadied the rifle, exhaled, and fired. The figure stiffened, then pitched backward down a ravine. 4. Willis froze. "You saw him watching me." Hartman nodded. They're circling. They want angles we can't see. He shifted positions, sliding through wet leaves until he found a better vantage point. Every movement was measured, deliberate, quiet. Behind him, the Marines moved when he moved, trusting the instincts of a man they once mocked. The fog thinned as the sun climbed. The ridge came into sharper view. Perfect. Hartman raised the rifle, saw a faint ripple in the grass 50 yards above the last kill, and breathed out. Crack! 5. He didn't smile, didn't speak, didn't even look away from the scope. Because he knew this wasn't over. It had only begun. The sun was climbing now, burning the fog off the ridge and turning the jungle into a mosaic of harsh light and deep shadow. For most Marines, this shift was terrifying. Snipers loved this hour. The contrast made it easy to hide a muzzle flash, easier still for their spotters to track movement below. But Hartman welcomed the light. It made the ridge readable, like a field finally lit after dawn roundup. Sergeant Willis whispered, "Montana, Lieutenant wants to know if you can clear us a path up that ridge." Hartman didn't take his eye from the scope. "How far up?" "All the way." Hartman slid the bolt forward, the sound soft, controlled. "Then I'll need a better angle." He crawled forward on his elbows, slipping between roots, avoiding vines that snapped or crunched. Even the way he moved showed another life. Years of stepping through brush that could spook cattle if handled wrong. Marines watched, stunned that a man so quiet could suddenly become the entire platoon's anchor. He reached a lip of earth overlooking a narrow clearing. The ridge rose steeply beyond it, the slope carved by old landslides. He steadied himself, controlling each breath, eyes narrowing. Something flickered. Not movement, reflection. A single drop of dew sliding off the brushed metal of an Arisaka sight hood. Crack. The shot echoed like a hammer against steel. A body dropped from behind a rock outcropping. The Marines murmured behind him, counting silently. 6. Hartman moved again, deeper into the tangle of roots and mud, establishing a new firing lane. His hands were steady, but the air had changed. The Japanese weren't firing wildly now. They were adjusting, strategizing. They had realized this wasn't luck. Someone below was dismantling their sniper screen. An Arisaka barked, sharp, precise, too close. A round chewed into the dirt inches from Hartman's boot. He froze. Not from fear, never that, from calculation. The shot was too clean, too centered. That meant a sniper with discipline, someone patient, someone good. "Montana?" Willis whispered. "You hit?" "No." He scanned the ridgeline again, replaying the sound in his mind. The Japanese rifle was higher pitched, meaning the shooter was farther away than the others had been. Higher elevation. He shifted right, ignoring everything except the faintest thread of logic. Patience. Patience was everything. He slowed his breathing again, letting the jungle fade until there were only shapes, lines, possibilities. Then, there. Barely a smudge of darkness in the crook of a dead tree, the barrel pushed through a hole in the bark. Hartman exhaled. Crack. A figure collapsed sideways, falling out of the tree in a long, silent drop. 7. Willis shook his head. "You're clearing them like fence posts." Hartman didn't respond. He was already crawling to a new vantage point. His movements were efficient, almost instinctive. He scanned left, nothing. Scanned right, shadows too deep, too intentional. He fired. A puff of dust burst from a hillside above. A helmet rolled. A body slumped. 8. The ridge was losing its confidence. The silence shifted, tense, unsettled. No more mockingbird calls from snipers mimicking wildlife. No more trick shots. The jungle felt like it was holding its breath. A burst of Type 99 machine gun fire tore through the clearing, shredding leaves, forcing the Marines behind cover. The Japanese weren't trying to hit anyone. They were trying to flush Hartman out, to make him move, reveal himself. It didn't work. He stayed still, perfectly still, letting the gunner think he had suppressed the Americans. Hartman listened closely, waiting. He knew machine gunners weren't alone. Snipers used their fire as bait. The gun stopped. Too quickly, too cleanly. Hartman aimed higher, toward the slope above the machine gun. A shape crouched beside a tree, concealed behind ferns, long, patient, waiting for a Marine to pop his head out. He didn't get the chance. Crack. The shape jerked sideways. 9. The Marines behind him exhaled as if they'd been underwater. No one spoke. No one laughed. The man they teased for months was doing more than shooting. He was dismantling an entire Japanese sniper network by feel. Hartman shifted again, moving toward a fallen log with moss thicker than a blanket. He rested the rifle across it and checked the ridge once more. 2 left. Maybe 3. The jungle felt different, like a herd spooked, scattering. Something was off. Snipers were ghosts, but even ghosts grew desperate when hunted. He scanned left. Nothing. Right dash, a flicker. A leaf bent the wrong way. Crack. A head snapped backward as a figure dropped behind a bush. 10. Sergeant Willis whispered, "They're falling apart. 1 more, Montana, maybe 2. Hartman nodded but didn't celebrate. His breathing steadied once more. He scanned. Movement. Fast, sloppy. A Japanese sniper breaking position, sprinting for new cover, panic overriding training. Hartman led the shot gently. Crack. The figure collapsed mid-stride, crashing into the brush. 11. Hartman lowered the rifle for the first time in hours. His hands were steady, his heartbeat calm. Behind him, the Marines stared like they were seeing him for the first time. The kid with the farm gun had just turned the entire battle. The jungle smelled different after a night of rain, cleaner, sharper, as if the earth itself were holding its breath. Hartman sat beneath a crooked palm, his rifle across his knees, listening to the distant sounds of Japanese troops shifting somewhere up the ridge. He'd eliminated 11 snipers in less than 2 days, but the fight wasn't finished. Men like that didn't operate alone. They were part of hunter teams, forward elements, scouts for something larger. Sergeant Willis crouched beside him with a canteen. "Lieutenant says the battalion reconnaissance boys are impressed. Says you bought us enough room to move out." Hartman nodded, but his gaze stayed fixed on the ridge. "They're repositioning. They won't let us have that ground." Willis exhaled, shaking his head. "Montana, last night you slept next to that rifle like it was your fiancée." "It is," Hartman murmured dryly. The platoon began ascending the slope cautiously, stepping over mud, roots, and patches of thin moss that concealed sharp rocks. Hartman led, not because anyone ordered him to, but because every man trusted his eyes more than their own now. He moved with the same controlled ease he used to move through tall wheat back home, slow, deliberate, sensing danger before seeing it. Halfway up the ridge, he froze. The Marines behind him stopped instantly. He raised a fist, then pointed to a cluster of bushes shaped unnaturally, too rounded, too symmetrical. Japanese camouflage often used bundled leaves tied with string. A faint glimmer winked inside the greenery. Hartman didn't waste a breath. He dropped to one knee. Crack. A Japanese rifleman tumbled out of the bush, a freshly built fighting position collapsing with him. Gasps followed behind Hartman, but he was already scanning for the next threat. "Trap," he said. "They knew we'd come up after clearing the snipers." Lieutenant Harper moved to his side. "You think there's more?" Hartman nodded once. "Yeah, this isn't over." Moments later, 3 sharp clicks echoed up the ridge, stones knocking together. Japanese communication signals. The Marines ducked, Hartman didn't. He listened. 3 clicks meant movement, not attack. A shift, a reposition. He moved left, sliding behind a mound of wet earth. Through a thin gap in the foliage he spotted 2 Japanese soldiers flanking, silent and disciplined, moving with rifles low. Not snipers. Hunters. He steadied his breath, squeezed. Crack. One fell instantly. The second froze. A fatal hesitation. Crack. Down. The ridge erupted with outgoing fire, but the bursts were scattered, unfocused. The Japanese weren't attacking, they were covering a retreat. Hartman watched them pull back deeper into the mountains, realizing the same truth the Americans now understood. The sniper threat was gone. But a larger unit was pulling away, regrouping. The Marines secured the ridge before noon. Bodies of the 11 snipers Hartman had eliminated were recovered, their positions meticulously crafted, their camouflage intricate. Lieutenant Harper placed a hand on Hartman's shoulder. "You didn't just save us, you broke their eyes." Hartman didn't reply. He just cleaned the bolt of his rifle, the same way he had as a boy on the ranch, calm, methodical, silent. Because he knew tomorrow would bring more fighting. But today, the ridge was theirs. When the ridge was finally secure, the Marines established a temporary perimeter along the crest. The terrain offered a commanding view of the valleys below, jungle canopies stretching for miles, broken only by thin rivers and smoke rising from distant Japanese encampments. Hartman stood at the highest point, his boots sinking into the wet soil, his rifle cradled against his chest. Down below, the world felt chaotic. Up here, it felt quiet, almost peaceful. Willis climbed up beside him, breathing hard. "Battalion radioed in. Words spreading. They're calling you the Ranch Reaper." Hartman winced. "I don't need a nickname." "You don't get to choose. That's what happens when you save 2 platoons with an old Montana hunting rifle." Hartman didn't argue. Instead, he studied the tree line ahead. The Japanese withdrawal wasn't sloppy. They had moved with discipline, leaving no wounded, no equipment. That meant they weren't broken. They were adjusting. Lieutenant Harper approached, map in hand. "Hartman, command wants your assessment. You think they'll push back up this ridge?" Hartman shook his head. "No, not after losing their snipers. They'll avoid open angles now." "Then what do they do?" "Fall back to higher ground, or set traps along the east slope. They won't waste men trying to retake this ridge." Harper folded the map. "Good, because battalion wants us holding position until dawn." Orders were given, positions set, and Marines dug shallow foxholes. But Hartman remained near the crest, scanning, watching. The jungle below felt uneasy, like an animal circling outside lamplight. He'd grown up sensing danger long before it came, and something didn't sit right. Near dusk, distant movement caught his eye, figures slipping across a ravine far beyond rifle range. Not snipers, not scouts, a full squad, maybe 10, maybe more, heading deeper into the mountains. Willis joined him again. "They're running." "No," Hartman murmured. "They're repositioning. They'll hit another unit tonight." Willis's jaw clenched. "Then command needs to know." "They already do." Hartman lifted the field glasses hanging from his belt and handed them to Willis. "Look at their spacing, their pace. That's not retreat. That's maneuver." Harper confirmed the observation minutes later, sending runners back with the report. Battalion immediately shifted assets, preparing an ambush along the eastern valley. Hartman's single sighting changed the entire night operation. As twilight settled, the Marines gathered around small holes in the ground, rifles ready, helmets low, tension thick. Hartman sat with them but remained distant, quiet. His farm gun, cleaned and oiled, rested across his legs. Willis nudged him. "You know, yesterday everyone thought that rifle was a joke." Hartman didn't smile. A tool's only as good as the hands using it. Yeah? Well, today that tool saved 40 lives. Hartman brushed dirt off the stock. My father always said a rifle doesn't care where it's used, in a barn or a war. It only cares that the shot matters. Willis nodded slowly. Well, yours did. The jungle began to darken, the sky fading into a bruised purple. Crickets rose in chorus. For the first time in 2 days, no sniper eyes tracked their movements. The ridge, bloody, battered and contested, was finally theirs. Hartman looked down at his rifle one last time before setting it aside. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a relic. It was a promise he'd made long before the war. To himself, to home, to every quiet field he'd ever walked. And in 48 hours, that promise had changed the fate of an entire platoon.